What if a poor girl's very first day as a taxi driver led her straight into the backseat of fate, where a lonely millionaire was waiting, not for a ride, but for a reason to live again? She thought she was just picking up a fare, but this ride would take her somewhere no map could ever show. Stay with us, because what happens next will make you believe in second chances and love found in the most unexpected places. The city hadn't yet woken, but Maya was already gripping the worn steering wheel of her second-hand taxi, breath fogging the windshield as she sat in the stillness before dawn, wearing her father's faded driving cap like armor, eyes wide with hope, and nerves wrapped so tightly around her spine she thought she might snap if she breathed too hard. And this wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline, a last shot to keep the lights on, to pay off hospital bills that came faster than prayers, to stop the eviction letters from stacking on the kitchen counter like death notices. And as the old engine coughed to life beneath her trembling fingers, she whispered to it like a friend, "Please don't die on me today." And then with a deep breath and a glance at her mother's photo taped to the dash, she pulled into the empty street where the city stretched like a sleeping giant, unaware that today everything was about to change. The traffic lights blinked yellow through the morning mist, shops were still shuttered, and she rolled past high-rises with golden balconies that looked like palaces from where she sat, a girl with $10 to her name and fuel just enough to last a few hours. If the universe was kind, maybe longer. Her radio crackled with static, her heart pounded, and when the app pinged its very first ride request, she flinched, stared at the screen, saw the location, an upscale hotel downtown, and swallowed hard. She whispered again, this time to herself, "Okay, Maya, be brave." She turned left, then right, navigating through shadows and streetlights, her pulse racing not just from fear of failure, but from the aching, distant hope that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to begin. The hotel loomed like a silent cathedral of wealth, all glass and gold edges, its entrance guarded by bellboys who didn't even glance her way as Maya's battered taxi rolled to the curb, the rain starting to mist across the windshield in tiny silver daggers, and her hands clutched the wheel tighter, suddenly painfully aware of the rust on her door, the faded upholstery, the engine's uneven hum, as if her entire car was apologizing for being out of place. But before she could drown in doubt, the passenger door opened with a soft click, and in slid a man dressed in gray, tailored coat, dark eyes, quiet energy, no umbrella, no phone in hand, just presence, calm and heavy like a storm held in human form. He didn't speak right away. He didn't check her name. He simply gave her an address she didn't expect, a lookout point an hour outside the city, high on a foggy hill no tourist ever asked for. And for a second, she turned to look at him fully, catching the way his gaze stared ahead like he wasn't really seeing the road at all, but something far, far beyond it. "Are you sure?" she asked, trying to hide the shake in her voice. He nodded once. "Yes, just drive." So she did, shifting gears, pulling away from the glow of privilege and back into the winding arteries of the waking city. The sound of tires on wet pavement, the only thing filling the silence between them. And she kept stealing glances in the rearview mirror, noticing the way his fingers tapped his knee as if keeping time with thoughts too loud to voice. The way he avoided eye contact, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. The kind that comes from losing something money can't replace. Maya didn't ask questions. She just drove, steady hands on the wheel, as they left the skyline behind and moved toward mist-covered hills where signal bars died and memories lingered. And though neither of them knew it yet, this wasn't just a ride. It was the moment two lost people collided, quietly, like two stars brushing in the dark before either realized they were about to change each other forever. The road narrowed as the city dissolved behind them, replaced by winding curves wrapped in fog and towering trees that swayed like ghosts whispering secrets to the sky. And Maya's hands gripped the wheel tighter with every mile, heart pounding harder as the rain thickened into a curtain, visibility dropping with each turn, and she glanced at the man in the back seat, still silent, still distant, his face unreadable but his eyes occasionally lifting toward the gray window as if chasing a memory too fragile to hold. And just as the GPS crackled and died, the engine sputtered once, then again, and, with a terrifying cough, the car rolled to a slow, stuttering stop on the side of the deserted mountain road. "No, no, no," Maya whispered, her breath fogging the glass as she turned the key again. And again, the only reply a guttural groan from beneath the hood, and when she looked up, the man was watching her in the rear view, calm, unblinking, like he had expected this. "I'm so sorry," she blurted, already fumbling for her phone, realizing she had no signal, no plan, no clue what to do next. "It's my first day. I didn't think—" "It's fine," he said gently, and there was something in his voice that stopped her cold, something warm and sad and quiet, like an old song playing on a distant radio. "We'll wait out the rain." They got out and found shelter beneath a narrow wooden awning beside an abandoned fruit stand. And for the first time, they stood face to face. Maya soaked, shivering, hair clinging to her cheeks, and he, still wearing that same unreadable calm, as if storms couldn't touch him. "I really am sorry," she repeated. "This car, it's all I have." He looked at her and for the first time really saw her. "And yet, you kept driving." He said, "Most people would have turned back at the hotel." She gave a nervous laugh. "Most people don't have rent due and a sick mom waiting for meds." He smiled. A real one this time. Small, sad, but real. And most people don't survive what you've survived to say that so casually. She didn't know what to say to that, so she looked away, and they stood there in silence, not awkward, but thick with something unspoken, until he finally added, "This place. It's where I used to go with the only person who ever made the noise stop." She turned slowly. "She's not here anymore." He shook his head. "Not for a long time." The rain softened. The fog began to lift. And in that quiet clearing on a forgotten road, something began to bloom. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. That rare, impossible moment when two strangers stop being strangers, because grief has the same language in every soul. They sat beneath that sagging awning as the rain faded into a gentle mist, the air still thick with damp earth and memory, and Maya pulled her knees to her chest, hugging herself for warmth while her damp curls clung to her face, her taxi sitting lifeless just yards away like a broken promise, and beside her, Eli, because that was the name he finally offered when she asked, quiet and hesitant, like it still tasted strange on his tongue, rested his back against the wood, staring out at the trees with eyes that had seen too much and shared too little. And the silence between them was no longer empty, but humming with something fragile, something rare, like two bruised souls accidentally brushing in the dark. "She was my sister," he said suddenly, voice low, cracked. "She used to drag me up here every Sunday, said the air smelled cleaner where the city couldn't reach us." She made the noise stop. Maya didn't respond at first, unsure if he needed words or just space. But then she said softly, "Is that why you looked so far away when you got in? Like you were driving toward her instead of a place?" He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt the weight of it, like being seen for the first time. Like he wasn't staring at her wet hair or cheap jacket or tired eyes, but something deeper. "You're sharp," he murmured, too sharp for someone who apologizes so much. She shrugged. "You learn to apologize first when you grow up poor. It makes people less likely to yell." He gave a dry laugh, surprised by her honesty. "And here I thought I was the one hiding. Maybe we both are." She said, "You are behind in silence." Me behind this stupid wheel. They sat in it together. That truth, that shared ache. A bird chirped nearby. The fog lightened. And then he reached into his coat, pulled out a flask, and handed it to her. "It's just tea," he said, "my sister's favorite blend." She sipped it, warmth spreading through her chest like hope. "It tastes like honey and memories." He smiled. That's what she called it too. And for the first time in a long time, Eli didn't feel alone, and Maya didn't feel invisible. And though the road was broken, the engine silent, and the sky still gray, something in that tiny clearing shifted. Something that neither of them dared name just yet, but both of them quietly knew. This wasn't just a delay. It was the beginning. By morning, the fog had lifted and the taxi had somehow sputtered back to life after Eli helped her push it out of the mud and coax the engine with the calm patience of someone used to fixing things no one believed in anymore. And as they drove down the winding road back toward the city, the silence between them was no longer heavy, but comforting, filled with stolen glances through the rearview mirror and soft half-smiles that neither of them tried too hard to hide. But when she dropped him off in front of a quiet, gated brownstone tucked in a part of town she'd only ever driven through, he hesitated before stepping out, holding the door open for just a second too long, as if unsure whether to leave or stay. And Maya, gripping the wheel too tightly again, looked up and said with forced casualness, "Take care, Mr. Eli," and he looked at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Just Eli," he said, and then he was gone, swallowed by glass and steel and doormen who looked at her like she didn't belong. She drove off fast, her heart thudding louder than the rattling engine, telling herself not to be foolish, not to imagine things that didn't exist, not to dream beyond her station because dreams don't pay rent or buy medicine. But she thought of the way he had listened, the way he had remembered her mother's name, the way he had handed her his sister's tea like it was an heirloom instead of a drink. Eli, meanwhile, stood in the elevator of his building, staring at nothing, his phone buzzing with unread messages, his assistant leaving voicemails about meetings and investors, and an international conference he was expected to fly out for in 3 days. But none of it seemed to matter, because all he could think about was the girl with rain in her lashes and fire in her words, the girl who never once asked him who he was or what he owned, only listened like he was someone worth listening to. That night, he sat in his penthouse apartment, alone at a long dining table with 20 empty chairs, and stared out the window as city lights flickered like hollow stars. And then, on impulse, he pulled up the taxi app, searched his ride history, found nothing, no name, no license plate, nothing but the ghost of a moment. And so, he called his assistant and canceled the flight. "There's someone I need to find," he said, "and she doesn't know who I am." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, may I ask who?" Eli looked out into the night, the city sprawling below him like a maze of missed chances. A girl who didn't look at my wallet, just looked at me. And somewhere across the city, Maya lay awake in her cramped apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering why her heart ached like it had left with someone she barely knew. Someone she told herself she'd never see again. 3 days passed like fog, heavy and unspoken, and every time Maya drove past that hotel where it all began, she glanced toward the entrance without meaning to, her heart tightening with the ache of unfinished conversation and the quiet grief of something that felt like it had started and ended all at once. And though she told herself to forget, to focus on fares and fuel and her mother's prescriptions, she couldn't help the way her chest clenched every time the back seat stayed empty, as if some part of her still waited for him to appear again, like a page she hadn't finished reading, until Thursday evening came wrapped in fading sunlight and tired silence, and her phone pinged softly with a new ride request. Just a name, a location, nothing unusual. So she drove, eyes half on the road and half on thoughts she didn't want to name. And when the back door opened and he stepped in, her breath caught so fast it felt like drowning in relief. It was Eli's. No coat, no suit, no practice distance. Just him, simple and present, like he'd never left at all. And for a long second, neither of them spoke, until she found the courage to glance up into the rearview mirror and saw him watching her like he'd been searching through lifetimes to find her again. "I was hoping it would be you," he said, his voice softer than she remembered, but just as steady, and she gripped the wheel to keep her hands from shaking. "I thought you left," she whispered, the words catching on something raw. "I almost did," he replied, leaning forward just enough for her to feel the weight of his gaze. "But you said something I couldn't forget, that you keep driving because someone's waiting on you. I realized I haven't had someone to wait for in a long time." Her throat tightened, emotion rising like floodwater, and for a moment, the world outside blurred until it was just the two of them, suspended in a cab that suddenly felt too small to hold what was growing in the air between them. "So, "What now?" she asked. Annie smiled, slow and unguarded. "I don't want to go anywhere. I just wanted to see you again." And when she looked at him, really looked, she realized the road she thought had ended was only just beginning. They didn't speak much after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the silence between them was warm now, not heavy. And as Maya drove through the city with no set destination, just Eli in the back seat watching her with a calm that made her heart beat in places she thought had gone quiet forever, she began to feel something she hadn't in a long time. Peace, the kind that doesn't come from money or safety, but from being truly seen. And he didn't ask about the bills or the second job she worked at night or the cracked screen on her phone. And she didn't ask about his wealth or the building with doormen, or why a man with everything would get into a taxi with nothing but a quiet gaze and a hope she couldn't quite name. But every stoplight they passed felt like a moment suspended between past and future. And when he finally asked if she could take him to the old lookout point again, her breath caught. Because it wasn't just a place. It was their place now. The spot where time had slowed and something invisible had started to grow. The sun was setting by the time they reached the edge of the city, and when they stepped out, the air was still, painted with the kind of golden light that made everything feel like it mattered more, and they sat on the hood of the car, his coat draped over both their shoulders, her fingers brushing his by accident and not moving away. And he told her about the night his sister died, the promises he never got to keep, the business deals that left him rich but hollow. And she told him about the first time she saw her mother collapse, the nights she didn't need to buy pills, the loneliness of pretending to be strong for everyone else when she had nothing left for herself. They didn't cry. They didn't apologize. They just listened, and when she looked up at him and whispered, "I never thought someone like you would sit beside someone like me," he turned to her with eyes so sincere it made her tremble, and said, "Then maybe it's time you start seeing yourself the way I do." And in that moment, the world shifted, not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with a touch, a look, a truth that wrapped around them like the night sky. And when he took her hand, finally, slowly, she didn't flinch. She held on. The next morning came like a dream Maya wasn't sure she was allowed to keep. And as the city stirred with horns and motion and people chasing things that never waited, she stood outside her mother's clinic, holding a small envelope Eli had pressed into her hand, before disappearing into the dawn with a promise that felt too delicate to question. And when she opened it, there was no note, no signature, just a folded receipt showing her mother's medical bills. Every last cent, marked paid in full, and beneath it, a single sentence written in soft ink, because no one who carries love like you should ever carry the weight alone. Her knees almost buckled right there on the sidewalk, but she didn't cry. She ran inside, hugged her mother tighter than she had in weeks, and when her mother asked how, Maya just smiled through the tremble and said, "A stranger who didn't stay a stranger." But that was the last she heard from Eli for days, and the silence gnawed at her heart with a cruel hunger she tried to drown in work, picking up late-night rides, ignoring the way she looked for him in every face that climbed into her back seat, until one night, drenched in exhaustion and neon lights, she parked by the same hotel, the place where it all began. And there, under the awning, stood Eli, holding a small white box and looking like every second apart had aged him a lifetime. She stepped out, stunned, her voice catching before it could form a word, and he walked to her without hesitation, hands shaking slightly as he opened the box to reveal a key. Not flashy, not gold-plated, just simple and silver. And beside it, a tiny replica of her old taxi cast in metal, and a card that read, "Maya's Fleet, the first ride. I started something," he said, voice hoarse. "A taxi company in your name, clean cars, fair wages, safe hours, for people like you. Because I can build empires, but I couldn't build what you gave me in one drive." And she didn't speak. She grabbed his face, pulled him down, and kissed him like a woman who had finally found the place she belonged, not in the back seat of someone else's story, but in the front seat of a future that had once seemed unreachable. And when they broke apart, breathless and shaking, he whispered, "Marry me." And she laughed through tears, nodded once, and whispered back, "Only if I get to drive us to the ceremony." The wedding wasn't extravagant, not by the standards of the circles Eli had once moved in. There were no marble halls, no chandeliers dripping crystals, no orchestra tucked behind velvet. But it was perfect, set on a quiet hill overlooking the very lookout point where two broken paths had first collided, the sun warming the earth and painting the sky in gold as Maya stepped out of her new taxi, not in a limousine, not in heels, but in her father's old cap and a simple ivory dress that floated like forgiveness in the breeze, her smile wide, her eyes unafraid. And when she reached him, Eli, standing there in a crisp suit with his heart written all over his face. He didn't say a word, just took her hands like they were the only map he ever needed, and around them were only the people who mattered: her mother, finally healthy and beaming, the nurses who had once been over her hospital bed, now seated in the front row, a few of the drivers from the new company wiping tears discreetly, and the efficient, an old mechanic who had once fixed Maya's car for free and now stood with trembling hands holding a book he'd never thought he'd be asked to open. There were no speeches about destiny, no long-winded vows rehearsed for perfection, just a quiet promise shared through trembling voices and teary eyes. Two people who had seen the worst of the world and still chose to believe in something as fragile and defiant as love. When the rings were slipped on, the wind carried applause down the hill like music, and they kissed not like royalty, but like survivors, like travelers who had finally found home in each other's arms. As they turned toward the guests, hand in hand, the same worn taxi Maya once drove rolled up beside them, polished and humming softly, its back window painted with the words, "Just married, drive gently." Eli opened the door for her, and she smirked, slipping into the driver's seat while he circled to the passenger side. "You're really gonna let me drive?" she teased. "You've been driving since day one," he said, buckling in. "I'm just finally smart enough to let you." And with the engine purring beneath them, they rolled away into the falling light, no destination punched in, just a full tank, joined hands, and the kind of silence that felt like forever waiting to begin. Years later, long after the headlines stopped, after the cameras left and the novelty faded, a little boy with his mother's fire in his eyes and his father's calm in his heart sat in the back seat of a taxi, his legs swinging above the floor, staring out the window as the city rushed by. And when he asked, "Mom, is it true you met Dad in a car like this?" Maya, older now, but still glowing with the quiet strength of someone who had lived every word of her story, glanced at him through the mirror with a smile that carried 1,000 roads. "No," she said softly, "I didn't just meet him. I almost missed him." And as she drove past the old lookout point, now named Eli and Maya's Way, she slowed the car, let the boy look out, let him feel what it meant to start small and love big. Because what began with one broken car, one long drive, and one shared silence had become a legacy paved not in luxury, but in truth, in resilience, in the belief that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places. And as the boy laughed and pointed to the clouds shaped like hearts, Eli, now silver-haired but still watching Maya like he had on that first rainy morning, reached across the console, took her hand, and squeezed it once, no words needed, because some stories don't end. They just keep driving forward, mile after mile, heart to heart, forever. They say the richest love doesn't come from grand gestures or perfect timing. It comes from seeing someone's brokenness and choosing to stay. From an old taxi seat to a lifelong journey, Maya and Eli didn't just find each other, they found home. So, the next time you meet a stranger, remember every love story begins with one open door.